Welcome again to the RANSWIS weekly update. This week we're going to focus on the tech sector, specifically the US blue chip tech sector. It's been an interesting week. We had a number of releases this week and last week as well. And it's a good time to just look at the overall sector and see what's happening right now. The big news of the week was probably Google's numbers that came out. And Google basically is a money printing machine. Google is a gigantic company, and if anyone had any doubt about basically its growth, forecasts or growth prospects, it grew its revenue by 41% in the last year. This is from very high levels anyway, but to incredibly high levels. It's looking at about $250 billion a year in revenue. And what's amazing about Google is this: if you could compare it to other companies out there, what companies have the kind of revenue Google has? Maybe Apple, maybe Walmart. Those companies actually have to produce things. Apple has to get stuff from China, make the phones together. Walmart basically does a percentage on the goods it sells. So Walmart maybe does $500 billion in revenue a year, but it makes a very small profit on that, relatively. Whereas Google basically just has software, more customers, more servers, more software, more revenue. And the company is doing incredibly well on all fronts. Search is doing well. More interestingly, I found that also YouTube is doing incredibly well. Now this is YouTube, just the plain old YouTube, not YouTube Red or Premium, the one where you pay a subscriber fee every month, but just plain on YouTube. That earns more on revenue than Netflix does. So YouTube, just the advertising revenue on YouTube alone is more than the revenue of Netflix. And that's all of Netflix. Now, if you look at the valuation, you look at Netflix, no one is doing that kind of valuation for YouTube. Whereas YouTube, I think, is probably a better business. Netflix has to go out and get actual content, create, stuff. Sometimes it's a hit, sometimes it's a miss. It has difficulties when basically they have issues. For instance, a year or so ago, there was a movie from France called Cuties that had a lot of controversy around it. And the company had to deal with that. They had more recently the Dave Chappelle stuff where, they had a controversy around that as well. The company had to deal with that because it's its product. Whereas YouTube platforms people. If people don't like a particular creator, YouTube basically is not blamed for that because it's not the creator of that particular content. And as I said, YouTube is also working in premium and the subscriber base, basically trying to get people paying a monthly fee for YouTube, which apparently is taking off. And they also have things like Super Chat, where they actually allow creators to communicate with their audience and get tips and so on. And this becomes a substantial source of revenue when you consider the fact that YouTube takes about a third of that revenue that you contribute to creators directly as a fee. Software business is doing well. Like this is the search business is doing well. YouTube is doing well. In addition to the cloud business, small but still growing quite nicely. YouTube overall is making a massive amount of profit. I think profits are up over 90% for the year. Now the question then arises, what is the company going to do with that? We'll come to that in a bit. Another company that came out with some great results recently was Microsoft. Again, Microsoft gangbusters in terms of revenue, gangbusters in terms of profits. Amazon as well came through with incredibly good numbers. Amazon basically doubling revenue for the holiday period, showing that it still has huge growth potential. I do think that Amazon probably has a larger growth potential even than YouTube, even than Google rather. The reason being is that it addresses a larger market. Google, Alphabet rather, let me say that, addresses a market of advertising. Yes, we can talk about some of the other stuff, some of the stuff that X is doing, for instance, but Amazon addresses retail, and retail is probably, in terms of a percentage of the total economy, a multiple the size of advertising. Advertising is a kind of an offshoot of the retail sector. And Amazon basically does not just have retail, it's also going into the streaming business, so with Amazon Prime, and it also has the cloud business that's quite significant as well. So Amazon has also done incredibly well in the last year or so. Speaking of Google, Google does have some of these extra little moonshot ideas, and some of them may work out in the future. Stuff, for instance, like, it's stuff with AI, it's stuff with longevity, it's stuff with the climate change and, Google Fiber and all these kind of different things that they're looking at. However, the main business, the core business remains its search business, which remains, like I said, incredibly strong. And also the side businesses growing like YouTube and cloud, again, doing very well. We also saw numbers coming out from Facebook, which were very disappointing. Facebook is facing pressures on a number of different fronts. Firstly, they lost subscribers for the first time ever. So basically, there are less people on Facebook now than there were a year ago. This is a very surprising, not very surprising, but this is a very expected kind of development. Facebook is so large, it's very difficult to get more people onto Facebook who don't really know about it, aren't on it at the moment. At the same time, Facebook faces a lot of pressure because for some reason, it's more associated with the content on its platform than, for instance, YouTube is. So Facebook is facing a lot of pressure from regulators, not just in the US, but other parts of the world, to basically regulate the content. It's been blamed, for instance, for the genocide of the Rohingya in Myanmar. It's been blamed for unrest in other parts of the world as well. Also, other offshoots of Facebook, for instance, like Instagram, have been basically blamed for increase in mental health issues with young girls in the US. So Facebook is facing a lot of these negative headwinds at the moment. At the same time, the underlying business is in trouble. At the same time as well, interestingly enough, Facebook is pivoting towards an incredibly speculative and at the moment loss-making part of its business, which is this idea of Meta, the metaverse. So I don't know if you've heard of this, but Facebook changed its name to Meta, part of the metaverse. The metaverse basically is an idea of a virtual reality world, and Facebook wants to be, really strongly associated with that virtual reality world. It's got VR technology, the Quest 2, which by the way has not done badly at all. Last year, the Quest 2, I think, outsold any console out there in the market. But that being said, look at the size of Facebook. It's not enough at the moment to change the dial. Facebook basically wants to get into this metaverse kind of space. It's looking to have a kind of first mover advantage here. Unfortunately, part of its process in the past in terms of how to get into a new space, like for instance, how it got a hold of Instagram, how it got a hold of WhatsApp, was to acquisition. It basically went out, spent the massive amounts of money it's been making, and bought stuff. It bought Instagram, it bought, WhatsApp. But the same thing happened with Google as well. Google bought, DeepMind. Google bought YouTube. These things basically are not a path, I think, that these companies can pursue going further. I'll come to that in a second. But looking at Facebook's overall, impression in the market at the moment, it's quite negative. Declining subscribers, real headwinds when it comes to regulators, and a pivot towards a sector or a industry or a, whatever you can call it, specialization, an area of the industry, let me say, that is very speculative. Nobody knows for certain whether or not this VR technology is going to take off like Facebook expects it. Nobody knows for certain whether or not this is going to be the next big thing or not. VR technology has had many, many false dawns. There's been many cases where we thought VR was the next big thing, and for whatever reason, it just has not taken off as yet. Maybe this could be the case. If it is, maybe Facebook could be doing very well. But like I said, it's a very speculative kind of aspect to its business. Now, speaking about these acquisition stuff that we were talking about, with the Biden administration, what has happened is that they've changed policy when it comes to looking at merger and acquisition. They've got a very young person in charge of this at the moment, a woman called Lina Khan, and very young, I mean like early 30s. And she has some really radical views about acquisitions, about mergers, and how basically the US government should deal with these things. Until now, the US government has been very focused on harms to the consumer. So if the consumer was not being harmed, which like for instance, in the case of Google, you can't be harmed because they don't charge you anything. You can't be harmed monetarily. What they're going to do is they're going to just let you go ahead and do whatever you want to do. In the EU, for instance, there's far more focus on industry competition. In South Africa, for instance, there's industry competition plus labor issues as well that they focus on. And those things, I think, are coming more into play in the US. So in a recent interview with Kara Swisher, Ms. Khan basically mentioned the fact that the US government is now looking at not just competition harm to consumers in terms of higher prices, but they're looking at, will this particular thing affect competition among partners? Will it affect labor? This is something the US has never talked about before. And they also mentioned the fact that they won't just have a case where if you approve a merger or acquisition, it's a done deal. They reserve the right to go back and look at it in the future to see whether that merger and acquisition, for instance, if Facebook bought Instagram, the government now wants to have the right to go back years later and say, no, this really wasn't a good idea. Let's reverse this particular decision. And that means that acquisitions in Silicon Valley are going to be far, far fewer than we would expect, which means that companies like Amazon, companies like Google, companies like Apple, and even to a certain extent Facebook, which have these huge amounts of cash reserves, unbelievable amounts of money coming in, need to find a way to spend them. They can't go out and basically acquire stuff like they used to in the past. So we may be seeing an increase in dividends coming out, which might be a good thing for shareholders, but it's a trend that we need to keep an eye on going forward. And that's our wrap up of the tech sector for the world for this week. And I hope to see you guys again next week. Cheers.